Welcome, everybody, to this midweek edition of the Drive and Dish NBA podcast. My name is Kevin Rafuse. Justin Cousart, my usual co-host, is off with me this week. Justin will be back on our main episode coming out, so stay tuned for that. We got a whole lot to talk about, but in the meantime, in Justin's place, joining me, Mr. Sam B. Albuquerque. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Sam B. Albuquerque, high school sports reporter at the Spartanburg Herald-Journal. Look, I know we've made jokes about you being a Big J journalist, me be a Big J journalist, but you actually are one now for real. Like, you write for a newspaper, you cover sports. You're living the dream, bro.
Hey, I break news too. I broke my first piece of news recently. One of the big schools around here, Spartanburg High School. Their basketball coach stepped down, so I think I was the first to report that, which a- actually made me feel like a journalist. And the other day, at the end of the winter sports season, I was running around like crazy. I drove down to Columbia for the state wrestling championships, and went back and forth. That really made me feel like an actual journalist because I was running on fumes and I was driving hours and hours on the road to cover teams I'd never heard of, which really made me feel like the moniker of Big J journalist is deserved.
Yeah, you got deadlines now. Unfortunately, no Zion appearance at Spartanburg High School, so a little disappointing, but that would have been pretty
I
cool.
did I did watch Spartanburg Day when they're not in the regular leagues here, they're in the private school league. I did
Okay.
watch Spartanburg Day win the state championship, their first since Zion. So that was actually
Oh,
pretty
there
cool.
you go. Man, imagine if you didn't win the state championship with Zion. At that point, it's just like, yo, what are you doing? How is this possible? Like, you guys got NBA All Star on your roster, and you're not the best team in South Carolina. Like, unless I guess John Morant actually is from South Carolina. Um, I'm 90% sure John Morant's from South
I think
Carolina.
he's from South Carolina. I just don't know if he played high school ball in South Carolina.
Yeah, I don't know if he played. I mean, I know he played at Murray State, obviously, his college ball. I'm not 100% sure where he played his high school ball. I'll have to look that up. Um,
But even then, Zion, not even in regular high school ball. You're talking about private league basketball, which is like in this area, in the upstate South Carolina area, it's not like Oak Hill or IMG's playing in those teams. It's actually smaller private schools. And so if you're not winning what is called SCISA, state titles with Zion on your team, you're doing something wrong. They won
yeah,
three, so it's whatever.
well, right. Yeah, I was gonna say it's like, what are you doing here at this point? But speaking of what are you doing here at this point, it's kind of funny because Sam and I are both gonna kind of flog ourselves this episode, essentially. We're gonna, first thing, we're gonna talk about Sam's Lakers at the end of the episode. We're not gonna start with that, so I'll save him the sparing for now. I guess I'm just gonna go put myself on a spear. And we got to talk a little bit. I want to talk the Eastern Conference in general, but of course, the big game this week was the Sixers and Nets last night. Ben Simmons' official return to Philly. Of course, Ben didn't play. He was on the bench, though, serenaded with booze, an ironic cheer when he dunked before pregame. But I mean, that was pretty much as good as it got for Philly fans. It was pretty much all bad from the tip off after that. Final score is 129 to 100. It wasn't even really that close, as bad as it sounds. Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and Seth Curry just all completely unstoppable. Seth Curry having the revenge game of the century, but I know we don't want to panic after one game. And again, the Sixers have been, they were 5-0 with Harden in the lineup prior to this game. The only loss since acquiring Harden had come to Miami, but James didn't play in that game. But we talked about, and again, you don't want to overreact too much to one game in March, but the two things that stood out for me are one, I think that, well, let me rephrase this. I'm going to overreact. I don't think the Sixers have any chance to win in the Eastern Conference this year. I don't. I think that went completely out the window. I think all their flaws were exposed in one place. And there are two big concerns. One I'll get into in a little bit, and that is the depth. The depth is just, they're too top heavy right now. If Maxey, Embiid, and Harden are not firing on all cylinders, they just don't really have, George Niang was a great pickup. Danny Green is still there. He didn't play last night. He's dealing with a finger laceration. Obviously, Tobias Harris in the starting lineup as well, but their bench just doesn't have the firepower anymore to really keep up. And I think that was pretty telling, especially in the backup center position, which ironically had finally been fixed with Andre Drummond, but now is unfixed again because Drummond had to be a part of the Harden deal. But we can get to that in a little bit. Look, we talked about Ben Simmons' legacy and we talked about James Harden's legacy because both of them took a pretty big gamble with this, especially Harden in the sense that you're leaving a team with Kyrie Irving and with Kevin Durant, who looked like the two best players on the planet last night. when you're all firing and healthy, they were pretty much the favorite to win the title. James Harden took a big bet on himself to go and play with Joel Embiid, to probably have to go through a harder path when all is said and done if he goes through Philadelphia. And look, we know what James is at this point. He's an MVP. He made the NBA All 75 team. Like, this is one of the greatest basketball players of all time. But the knock has been he hasn't shown up in big games. There have been multiple ones where he just oddly hasn't been there. And last night is not really doing anything to settle those fears at all. When you go 3 of 17 for 11 points in a meaningful game on national television with the juice, with everything this had going into it, I know it felt like a lot. Obviously, there was a lot going on in terms of emotions, and I think you could see KD and Kyrie kind of take it out on Harden a little bit last night too. But for James Harden, who is trying to shut up the outside noise and kind of solidify his legacy, this was pretty much the worst start in the world you could have had in a meaningful game.
Okay, so I said I wasn't going to console you before here, but I feel so bad that I have to here. James Harden has never played with a player who is a different type of player than him that's better than him, right? So you think about Chris Paul, both ball dominant wing guard players, right? Joel Embiid is a different type of player who can succeed when James Harden isn't playing well, the small game James sort of mentality. You could always just dump it down to the big fella and you can still put up enough points to win a meaningful basketball game, because I don't think Joel Embiid is a guy who will be small in a big time game. We haven't necessarily seen it as much. The sample size isn't as big as we want it, but I think Joel Embiid is good enough to overcome James Harden's inabilities in big games. So that's the first piece of consoling to you. The second piece is you have another ball handling player who can get hot in Tyrese Maxey. If James can't get a bucket, if the 27 missed threes from the Houston Rockets, Golden State Warriors, James shows up again, Tyrese Maxey I think is good enough to hit a few big shots and can get you a shot in clutch moments if it needs to be from the perimeter. So I think what James can do outside of that is still very valuable to the Sixers team. The thing that I want to point out from this game, it's not really an overreaction, because I think everyone who knows anything about basketball agrees with this. The Nets best. They're good. Scott Van Pelt says this all the time, is how good is your good? The Nets good is the best in the NBA. And we saw it last night. And if they're playing at this clip, if Kevin Durant is healthy and playing like the best player in the NBA, which he is when he's healthy, and Kyrie Irving's on the floor and just being who he's always been when he's healthy, this Nets team is unbeatable. There's not another roster in the NBA that I think is better, especially after the James Harden trade, because they got the thing that the Sixers don't have right now: depth. Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, Nick Claxton, even Bruce Brown can get you a couple minutes there. So it's scary for the rest of the league to see what the Nets can do. And that's my biggest reaction, my biggest take. And it's not really an overreaction. It's the simple one that we all agree with. If the Nets are clicking, there's nobody in the NBA that's better than them.
It's crazy, though, because with the Nets, like, this should be a guarantee, like you said, but it's not, because of where they are in the standings now.
They're also the most dysfunctional good team in the NBA, which is ridiculous. And the Lakers aren't good, so I can't really say that. But they're the most dysfunctional good NBA team right now, which is ridiculous.
They're going to be in play-in position pending an insane collapse. And I mean, they're 5 behind Cleveland right now for 6. They're 3 behind Toronto for 7. I mean, Cleveland does have the Jared, and we'll talk about the whole state of the East here in a little bit, but Cleveland is out now without Jared Allen indefinitely, which is a big deal, obviously. Karis LeVert still isn't playing, but we're at 15 games left, and you got to make up 5. And oh, by the way, Kyrie Irving can only play in 5 more games. They have 10 home games the rest of the way. So they're going to be without Kyrie Irving. You're going to get Ben Simmons back at some point, and you're going to start to adjust him in the lineup. But in terms of getting these 3 guys on the floor together with Ben, with Kyrie, and with KD, they're not really going to have that adjustment period. So they are going to have to figure it out a little bit on the fly. I agree with you. When those 2 are clicking, I mean, you saw it last night. They were unstoppable when KD and Kyrie were going. We saw it last year before Kyrie got hurt. Like, they were blitzing Milwaukee. I mean, they were taking it to the Bucks until Kyrie went down. And even then, they still almost got him. I'm still Phoenix, the way they're playing right now, it's hard for me to put anybody over Phoenix if they're healthy. But I mean, I agree. Brooklyn's right there with them, and I picked them in the preseason, and now even post Harden, like you said, with the depth, there are still ways for them to win a championship. It's just insane because there's also a chance they get bounced before they even get into the playoffs. Or your reward for being, say, they get the 7 seed and catch the play-in, you're going to maybe get either the Heat or the Bucks the first round. At that point, honestly, I'm rooting to play the Sixers. I think they would beat the Sixers in a series like that. I think they'd have a lot harder of a time with Miami or with Milwaukee. And even if you get past them, they're probably going to beat you up for 7 games. I mean, especially Miami, the way they play defensively. But that's a heck of a reward in the first round. Where if they were able to get into that 6 seed, you run the you're more likely to play a Philly, a Boston, a Chicago. I think Boston is better than both Philly and Chicago right now. But if there's a chance you get one of those two teams, I think the Nets would be the favorite to beat them. And then at that point, yeah, you still got to run the gauntlet with the top of this conference. But it's a lot better than it would be if you're getting one of these juggernauts just kind of thrown at you in the first round.
Do you think KD is good enough to do it without Kyrie and the rest of this roster healthy? Let's say Ben is the Ben that we've always seen, where he could pick up a rebound and lead the break, and he's an elite defender. If it's KD, Ben at that, maybe averaging 10 a game and not necessarily being a focal point offensively, and Kyrie's a non-factor. Kyrie gets hurt. Kyrie, runs off somewhere random. I don't know. I'm not gonna pretend to know what's going on in Kyrie's mind. But is KD good enough to take this team to the finals?
Man, not without Kyrie. I don't think so. I think if they're out with Kyrie for
They were this. I'm doing an inch here. They were an inch away last year.
no, I know, and it's significantly different though. I think the East is better as a whole this year. It's just they have depth, but outside of KD, I just wonder where the offense is going to come from consistently enough. And that's Seth has obviously been great. I mean, he's averaging over 15 a game since going to Brooklyn. He really is the perfect fit to play that Joe Harris role. But no, I think they need Kyrie. Now, here's the beauty of it. You only got to win one game. I mean, the good thing that benefits Brooklyn in a weird way is if you get out of the play-in game, you being on the road is going to benefit when it comes to playing with Kyrie. Like, Kyrie's going to play more games if you're on the road than you will at home. It's just that's why, and that's the weirdest thing about all this is like if I'm Kevin Durant, I'm furious right now. If I'm walking off the floor last night and seeing that total obliteration that they just left in Philadelphia, and I'm seeing how good we look when we're together, and you can't play because you willingly won't get the coronavirus vaccine. I don't know how he's not more upset about this because of the opportunity that lies in front of them. Like Kevin Durant knows what this is. They know what they came for when they all came together.
I feel like at this point, KD's just over it. Like, what else can KD do at this point? Like, you're right. He should be frustrated. But like Kyrie, KD's a different type of dude. There's a reason he walked away from what was probably the best basketball situation in the past 10, 15 years over in Golden State, right? And so
Yeah,
how much of this do you think Kate like I don't like I feel like a part of me thinks KD wants to do it by himself. He wants to be in a bad basketball situation so that his legacy can almost do the opposite. He overcorrected what happened in with the Warriors, where like he was in the best basketball situation, so he got none of the credit. Now he actively puts himself in a difficult situation to get all the credit because if KD wins the title with James Harden forcing himself out, with Ben Simmons with his mental health issues and inability to really dunk the basketball, and Kyrie Irving playing half of the games, what does that do for Kevin Durant's legacy? Because I think it makes him considerably easily the best player in the NBA right now, and probably the next torchbearer after LeBron, right?
yeah. I mean, he already kind of was. Like he always was 1A to LeBron for the longest time, and it was just more of a testament to LeBron's greatness than anything. Than it was a knock on KD. I mean, I think it's tough because KD's legacy because of the Warriors rings and because everyone obviously rightfully views it as a cheat code probably isn't solidified as it should be. Like you said, if he wins in Brooklyn, I think a lot of that got erased last year just because of how heroic an effort he put on. Um, but it should get erased. I mean, that's the thing is like everyone already should know what Kevin Durant is. He's probably a top 15 player of all time, probably closer to 10 when all is said and done. I mean, it's him and Giannis are the two best players in the league right now. I kind of go back and forth every other night on which one I want more. But again, with KD's experience, it's kind of hard for me to pick against him. Of course, though, it boosts his legacy. I don't think he needs it at this point. But yeah, getting the ring without the hue of Golden State, if you will, with all that in the background of a team that had done it before without him, I think that definitely boosts it for a lot of the casuals, at least. Real NBA fans know what the deal is, I think, with Kevin Durant, and they should. But yeah, I definitely think in terms of more people would accept his greatness and accept his legacy than I think do now. And I guess that's what, again, kind of going back to Harden, that's what's so disappointing is it's like this is the ultimate Harden legacy writing test. Like the spotlight's on James right now. He's the one who wanted this. Like he asked for this. He asked out of Brooklyn. And so again, I think the chemistry needs to be worked on a little bit. I do think there is something to be said about, again, these guys have only played a couple of games together too, but again, he has that Paul George-ish a little bit where it was like Paul George, everyone knows he's great, but it was like, what's he going to do in the playoffs? James has kind of got to shake that a little bit. And you hope that was a blip last night, because if that's a sign of what's to come in the playoffs, we kind of know what the book is at that point.
So thinking about James and Joel, where would you rank them in the East as the most talented duos? You think about, was it Drew and Giannis, or I guess Chris and Giannis, depends on who you want to put in that second slot. With Chicago, you got Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan. With Miami, you got Bam and Jimmy. You have Jason and Jalen over in Boston, and then Brooklyn, obviously KD and Kyrie. I think they rank solidly in that 2-3 range. Like, you have to convince me with the Bucks. I would lean Giannis, but it would be KD, Kyrie, Giannis, and whoever that second guy is, and interchangeable almost to me in talent wise for James and Joel, just because of how good their good really is. And so if they're the two best players, like the second best group, and we can't really necessarily trust Brooklyn because Brooklyn, why? I think it's realistic to expect them to come out of the East. And you're right. It's going to depend on whether or not James Harden can be that guy in the playoffs. I have a hard time convincing myself that I can't see them getting out of the East. I really think they can.
I'm glad you're convincing yourself of that, because I'm completely negative on it at this point. Like, I want to be otherwise, but I think they're the fifth best team in the Eastern Conference. And I hate to take a one-game sample size away, but it's just, it feels like I've seen this movie before.
But Kev, we talked about this. Remember when the Lakers won the bubble title, right? Me and you had this conversation. At the end of the day, I think it was on your podcast too. The Lakers had the best two players in the playoffs. There's a realistic scenario here where the Philadelphia 76ers have the best two players in the East. Why is, like, I get one game is terrible. James has been on this team for how many games? 5?
Yeah, I mean, it's 6 now, but again, the Lakers had depth. The Sixers, and that's where the depth worries me a little bit. Is like the Lakers had depth. These other teams have depth. I think the Sixers, after you get out of that starting lineup, it gets pretty bare pretty quickly, and it gets to a point where, if
you have
he's off,
7 players on this team, because in the playoffs, that's all you need.
Yeah,
you have a backup big. DeAndre's okay. Like,
he can run out. Hold on. I'm not going to let you get on this podcast and tell me DeAndre Jordan stinks.
No, when I say okay, I mean he can play NBA basketball for 5 minutes.
Oh, shit. I might even disagree with that at this point. He was in for 3 minutes last night. I had already seen enough. DeAndre Jordan, there's a reason he keeps floating off contenders. I mean, he was terrible for you guys. He's not going to be good for us.
He was really bad. Okay, I like George Niang. Niang's okay.
I love George Niang. He's been great.
Danny
Green's been solid.
Okay, Tyrese, Tobias, obviously are two wins.
That's it.
Matisse, yeah, that's 7. That's all you need. You got to figure out the big part. Maybe Paul Millsap plays a couple minutes at starting at small ball 5. At the end of the day, if you're arguing about the 7th guy in a 7-man rotation, which is what it's going to matter in the playoffs, I think your starting 5 is good enough. And I think go ahead.
I guess just that I don't think it's the 7th guy necessarily. And I agree with you. Like, I think the Sixers top 2, I mean, JB and JT, the way they're playing right now, are right up there with them as well. It's not necessarily the 1 and 2 I'm worried about, though I guess maybe with the 2 with Harden, and that'd be unfair to say after this podcast. But No, it's the 3 to 5 that I'm worried about necessarily. And I love Maxey. Maxey's been great. Like Tyrese Maxey is, I'm not really like, he's low on the concern meter. I think he had a bad game last night. But I mean, with Matisse, you got great defense, but the offense leaves a little bit to be desired. Tobias Harris looks completely out of sync in this offense. You hope he started to get it going last night a little bit. He felt more in rhythm with his 3-point shot. That's going to be the biggest thing for them. It's just that's what I'm worried about. I don't think you get enough consistently out of them. And I mean, really, again, if you don't get 30 plus from the top 3 guys, I don't know that they have enough offense consistently enough in a 7-game series to beat some of these teams out. I think for 1 game, they can beat anybody in the NBA. But I think for 7, that might be a different story.
I have a hard time getting past the fact that the NBA is such a star-driven league, and not in the way that it's, that they market it, but in the way of the product on the court, the players on the court. If you have a guy who can get you a bucket at the highest level in the most pressure-packed situation, you're always going to be in it. And I think you guys have one of those guys, and possibly two if James can play in that big moment. In the regular season, we know you have two, but in the playoffs, I I'm pretty sure you have one. You might have 1.5. And I think that's enough to compete in the playoffs. And when I look up and down the East, the only team that scares me talent-wise above this team is the Brooklyn Nets. I think that the Milwaukee Bucks experience-wise scare me, and toughness-wise, the Heat scare me. But at the end of the day, I always lean back to who's your best two? Is your best two better than everybody else's best two? And I think the Sixers have the second best two in the NBA, in the East, not in the NBA, in the
All
East.
right. So my ranking right now, probably just throw the seeds out and assume for the sake of this exercise that Toronto and Brooklyn are your 7 and 8. And so Charlotte and Atlanta are out. If I'm ranking these teams right now, I probably still have Milwaukee as the favorite. Then I think I've got, then it's like Miami, Boston, Brooklyn. Brooklyn, again, it's just the situation with the seating. It's the only reason it's not more for them, and with Kyrie being part time. But I think there's a kind of a gap between then. I think it starts to shave off a little bit. You may have Philly over Cleveland and Toronto and Chicago, in my opinion, but that's probably about it. I think that's realistically like I think the Sixers could win a first round series for sure, but I think it's another second round exit. I hate to say it, but given the way that Boston is clicking right now with how good they are defensively, with how locked in Tatum is, I think they're better. I think again Miami's depth is better and is only getting better with Oladipo back in the lineup and with Markieff Morris coming back sooner than later. But I mean, how do you rank these teams? Like if you were to jumble them, I know you're high on Brooklyn too, and so am I in theory if they're all playing. But how do you kind of tier these teams out?
Yeah, if we're talking in theory, I would put a 1, 2, 3 of Brooklyn, Milwaukee, and Miami in whatever order you really want to put it there. And I think Philly slots in there at fourth. But I think they're in that second tier, but they're at the top of that second tier. And so when you say a second round exit, it's it's possible. I would lean towards probably putting Milwaukee because at the end of the day, Giannis had one of the best playoff performances we've ever seen in recent memory this past season. So I lean towards the guy who's done it the most recently and has shown that he's still in that same realm of player. So I'd go Milwaukee. I'd probably throw Miami second just because I trust that organization more than any other organization in the NBA. But if they get Brooklyn in the first round, who the hell knows, right? And then I put Brooklyn just for the fact that I have no idea what's happening there and the Kyrie effect of it all, and then Philly fourth. But I think any four of those teams have the capability of making it out of the East. Chicago, good story, but at the end of the day, I don't trust them, especially if they're not healthy, especially if Caruso and Lonzo aren't healthy. Boston, you know how I feel about Jason Tatum, and I'm starting to eat crow on Jason Tatum these past couple weeks. I'm just holding out to see if this continues for an entire season. Cleveland's fun, but I think that's around where I rank them. I'd go Milwaukee, Miami, Brooklyn, Philly.
It pains me. You're lower on Boston than me. It pains me to say this, but I think Boston's been playing the best basketball in the league for like a month and a half. Their defense is locked in. The offense is like number 4 in net rating right now. It just looks really good on paper. The depth is good. I love their trade deadline. Derek White was a great pickup. Al Horford looks like it's 2010 again. Rob Williams has been great defensively. They got Tice to add even more depth down there. Again, it's crazy because they could get rewarded with a really difficult series. And I mean, there's a chance they play Milwaukee or Philly in the first round. Like that could be a slug it out series. It's again, same thing with Miami. Miami could very well be the 1 seed and get rewarded with Brooklyn if things goes wrong. It's like that is pretty close to worst case scenario, actually. And it's why these seedings are going to matter. Real quick before we get out of here, I do want to switch over to your Lakers. Obviously not the season that anyone was expected. It's pretty much worst case scenario there. The Lakers are in 9. You guys got 2.5 up on New Orleans right now. CJ McCollum is in COVID protocols as well. Pretty considerable distance between the Lakers and the Clippers right now, but it's looking like a play-in game scenario. I guess the question is with Russ, we don't really got to just keep beating the dead horse, but do you think they buy him out, or do you think they just suck it up and pay him $47 million next year, punt the season, and just be free of it when it's all said and done?
So there's a couple things with the Lakers. The Russ thing is obviously the headline, right? And when you think about this roster, would they be better if Russ just went home? I don't even know if that's true, right? I guess maybe there's an addition by subtraction thing, but at the end of the day, this Lakers front office and ownership has said, "Hey, LeBron, you get to make the decisions, but you're gonna live with the decisions you make, and we're not gonna mortgage our future any further." And that 2027 first round pick that's been floated out there since the trade deadline was the example of hey, LeBron, you don't have the same power in this organization that you had in Cleveland. And so it's at the end of the day, I think this ownership group in the front office will be like, hey, we're not good, and we're just gonna punt it. We're gonna punt the season. I don't think there's any way to fix it. And so I think Russell just stays, man. I really do. Like Bill Simmons has come out a couple of times and said that he thinks he'll go away. They'll fake an injury or whatever. But I think he'll be on the roster come summertime, and we'll see if they move him in the summer and during the offseason. But I think he's there. The thing with the Lakers that I think everyone is realizes, but the sexier conversation is Russ. The fact is, the offense isn't necessarily the biggest issue. We just can't defend. We can't defend anyone. We're giving up so many points. I think we give up 113 points a game, which is, ranked, I think, 26th in the NBA. Like, I don't care if Russ can't shoot. I don't care if Russ can't fit in the offense. Our offense is good enough. LeBron is averaging 29 a game. We can't stop anybody. That's the issue. When you look up and down this roster, and Rob Pelinka and LeBron in the clutch sports machine made a decision, said, hey, we're going to get shooters and we're going to let our defensive stalwart players go. KCP, Kyle Kuzma was a good defender down the stretch last year. Obviously Alex Caruso, everyone knows, the Cruz GOAT. But that's the issue. It's just we don't have guys who are good defenders. Carmelo's not a good defender, and he's playing a lot of minutes for this team. LeBron at this age isn't necessarily a good defender. Anthony Davis isn't the same anchor defensively that he was on the championship team. Malik Monk can't defend anybody. Taylor Horton Tucker tries. He tries, but he doesn't have the lateral quickness to defend at an elite level. Austin Reeves might be the best perimeter defender on this team. Think about that.
Yeah, it's scary.
And no offense to Austin Reeves, but who the hell is Austin Reeves? Like before this season, who knew anybody? Anybody know who Austin Reeves was? I didn't. He's great. He's been really good for this team. He's a good shooter. He tries defensively. He doesn't really make many mistakes. But at the end of the day, we don't have perimeter defense. And if Anthony Davis isn't that same guy on the block, then nothing we're going to do defensively is going to work. And it hasn't. And that's why we're this bad. It's not because Russell isn't fit in offensively. It's because nobody else on this team defends.
Last one real quick before we get out of here. I know he can't really defend that well, but is Malik Monk genuinely the only success story for the Lakers this year?
Yeah, I mean, he's averaging 13 a game. It's about what Malik Monk did in Charlotte, right?
Yeah, it just felt like Malik Monk was on the scrap heap. Like he was pretty much out of the league when the Lakers came calling, and now I don't think he's going to be out of the league anytime soon. He's going to bounce around a lot longer. I mean, it's quite literally probably a career-saving story for Malik Monk.
Yeah, this is his best scoring output year. I'm looking through his stats right now. He averaged 11 last year. He's averaging 13 this year. He had that really weird suspension, right?
Mhm.
I think a substance abuse problem. I don't, whatever. But he's shooting the ball, at a high clip. I think 39% from three. He's good. He's a good player, and I'm glad we got him. But I think he's on a 1-year deal, right?
Yeah, it was a 1-year deal because again, like we said, he was looking at like he was in 10-day territory essentially going into the season and kind of through the season. And now, he's gonna get a deal somewhere. I don't know how long term it's gonna be, but there's no chance he's not on an NBA roster this upcoming season, which is something that going into this season could have actually been a pretty high probability. So got to find the little victories, I guess, something like that. Thank you, my friend Sam B. Albuquerque, for joining us on the show today. High school sports reporter for the Spartanburg Herald-Journal. Make sure you check that out. Upstate South Carolina in the building. Sam, you got anything else you want to plug? I always give the last minute to you, of course.
Honestly, man, just work, just my work with the Herald Journal. I've been slacking on the podcast game. My pod has not been updated in a little while here, mainly because of all the transition in my life. So if you guys just want to follow me on Twitter, and you'll see all my pieces there. If you guys want to subscribe, go for it. I think we're running a $1 for 6 months deal, which is if you care about upstate South Carolina stuff. So do that.
There you go. Leave us a review on iTunes, good or bad. We'll read them on the podcast. If you're not an Apple user, Spreaker, TuneIn, Stitcher, Amazon Music, anywhere you find a podcast, you can find us, Spotify as well. And you can watch the podcast on YouTube. Just will be back for the main episode this week. And we appreciate you guys checking in.